Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, August 15th, 2025, and today we are talking calcium and blossom end rot, how the EPA has determined that its job is the opposite of its job, and it's Feedback Friday. So let's do it. All right, happy Friday, everyone. I hope you all are geared up and ready for another fun and exceedingly hot weekend, or at least that's what it is here. The heat is just unrelenting this year. Got a couple great 20-second videos, though, yesterday of fails. One from Lamb's Quarters Farm having raccoons in the sweet corn, and Jasmine in North Alabama fighting unending grasses. I feel that on both fronts, y'all. The solar fence charger going down in the middle of the sweet corn season feels a little too convenient, though, raccoons. Getting a little bit too obvious here. Please continue to send those 20-second garden fail videos, though, to farmermike@no-tillgrowers.com. Love seeing that. Love seeing your farms. It's just so cool. And also love helping people to know that it's okay to have some messes in the gardens from time to time. Literally every grower you follow does. Anyway, it's Friday, which means Feedback Friday, where we explore what you all were saying about this week's topics. On Monday, we talked about language and about water collection, and I also mentioned more watermelon juicing. It's just kind of what I'm doing right now. On that point, at Dulet7960 wrote, quote, any diploid seeded watermelon variety can be used as a pollinizer for triploid seedless melon production. It might be more efficient for a commercial grower to use those small, very seedy, almost inedible types specifically to grow the seedless crop, but in a home garden, just use a high-quality seeded melon for this purpose. Then you can enjoy all the fruits. 1 seeded plant per 3 seedless plants is typically recommended for good pollination, end quote. So yeah, this is technically true and also kind of a good idea for, home growers. The only concern is that the pollinator melons that come with the seedless melons bloom more and for longer. So the risk of not getting the proper pollination you need for the seedless watermelons is a bit lower if you use the pollinator seeds that they give you. But perhaps if instead of the pollinator melons, you grew maybe 2 melons you liked, the chances are you would, be covered in your pollination. I will say, though, that I kind of like growing the pollinator melons because I don't feel bad just, juicing them. Other melons, I'd feel like I'd have to eat them or sell them, but like these pollinator melons, they're just juice to me. And at this point that I love my watermelon juice. You're welcome, winner me. On the water collection stuff, at NoVampires223, heard that, wrote, quote, I have looked for ways to clean 5,000-gallon tanks. Being disabled, I am not climbing into that tank. I came across info from Canada where it is illegal to let someone climb into the tanks where they use hydrogen peroxide. More research is required, but sounds good to me. It smells better than bleach, and you don't have to scrub the tank. Love your show, Jesse, end quote. Great, yeah, thanks. Good addition here. I think maybe a power washer and maybe a little hydrogen peroxide would be sufficient for the cleaning. But if it's particularly mucky in there, you may have to hire someone to clean it, if even with a big scrub brush, if they're not allowed to get into the tank itself. But anyway, not the worst idea to clean those out occasionally. At Asteria4279 asked, quote, for water collection, if you're using it to water plants, not for direct human consumption, what is the problem with algae in the tank? My brain is thinking it might actually be nutritious, like a little seaweed every time. In fact, could you put a little solar-powered bubbler in there and encourage algae growth to create a little extra nutrition as you watered with it, end quote. Good question. And the biggest issue with any sort of algae in the tank is just it's going to be physical. It just has the high potential of clogging the pipes, though there may also be some small risk with toxins such as cyanobacteria. In some cases, algae can be beneficial, certainly, and maybe an excellent soil amendment or compost addition, but not likely worth the risk to have it in your water tanks. Just maybe more trouble than it's worth. On Tuesday, we discussed flea beetles, and there are lots of good comments and questions in there. At Devin Clement wrote, quote, I recently bought a flame weeder that I haven't really implemented in my system that much yet, LOL, but I wanted to ask if doing an extra slow pass over plots with insect problems could kill off some of the eggs and larvae, or will the soil be too insulating for the heat to affect them, end quote. Great question. And the answer is, probably wouldn't be super effective even if you went slow. Soil is incredibly insulating, which is why you can, for instance, run over a bed of shallowly sown carrots right before they're germinating to clear the bed of weeds that germinated before the carrots do without killing the carrot seed. Like it the soil insulates it pretty well. Not that it would hurt necessarily, but that's the idea. At LKSF9820 wrote, quote, "Not a fantastic solution, but I found flea beetles were at their worst in spring. The later on the season got, the less damaging they were. So I potted on, as we call it here, putting susceptible plants in pots and keeping them away from the soil until later on in the year. They were not only bigger and stronger and able to cope, but also the flea beetle activity had died down a bit. More time and expense, but it worked," end quote. Yes, this is a good addition. And in fact, timing is something I neglected to mention about this subject because it is actually referenced several times in the literature. You can time your plantings around their hatchings. For instance, planting potatoes later rather than first thing in the spring. But the flea beetle's prime seasons will differ a bit by species. As market gardeners, waiting longer is not always an option because our job is oftentimes to beat the market. But for sure, there is something to be said with practically any pest about timing your plantings. And if you have the space to pot on/pot up, that can help. Sure. Of course, make sure the plants in the greenhouse are protected too, as flea beetles are clever enough to find the greenhouse tables. Stupid nature in all its intelligence. On Wednesday, we had the great Nathan Rutz on to talk about composting, Pete, a worker-owned co-op operation, and all sorts of other stuff. Lots of complimentary comments about that particular conversation, which is always cool to see when we have guests on. You all are super awesome about that. So thank you. And the Pete Moss segment of the conversation started many good threads in the comment section that will be too much for me to get into here, but you can go and read them over at YouTube. At Brandy Stack wrote, quote, "I desperately want the 5-hour unabridged version of this conversation. You'll just have to come to one of our conferences when Nathan and I get together, and now he drinks beer and I hang out." But anyway, they go on. So cool, getting some history in there. I do want to mention that the study referenced in the peat portion was paid for by the Canadian Sphagnum Peat Moss Association, and thereby not typically a study I'd put weight behind, but I agree that the alternatives aren't better. Also, I think for a soil purveyor to use peat in conjunction with composting may be closer to carbon neutral. Certainly, Miracle-Gro isn't making compost and is an extremely extractive model. Please don't get me started on the microplastics in those synthetic fertilizer balls it comes with. Ugh. As always, a riveting episode. Thanks, y'all. End quote. I agree. Fun one all around, and Pete deserves more segments, so I will make sure at some point to get deeper into that subject because there's a lot that could be said. So we'll do that. Huge shouts to Nathan for coming on. Love chatting with him. Then on Thursday, we talked about toxins from plants versus chemicals and herbicides, and the UGA fan 24 wrote, quote, "There are many types of herbicides. They're used in different ways for different purposes. They, quote unquote, persist at different rates. It's not the case that, quote, manufacturers want the chemical to stay in the soil and block weeds for as long as possible. Herbicide carryover affects conventional farmers as well, not just gardeners that really want to use manure from and hay for animals they don't own. Manufacturers do encourage farmers to read the label," end quote. Thanks. And I didn't think I was totally unclear about that, but in case I was, not every herbicide is persistent herbicide. Those are kind of a specific thing, but definitely some are. And when those more persistent herbicides make it into the compost or farms through horse manure, hay, etc., they can make it difficult to grow on those farms, and or they can be taken up by the plants and then sold to people. So, then it becomes less an issue of how they persist in the soil and more of an issue of how they exist in your body. And not to mention, they are difficult to remediate from soil, so that's also fun. Anyway, I've done videos on persistent herbicides, but it's been a while since I've kind of refreshed my knowledge on that. So we'll revisit that conversation soon because the reality is that things change. New herbicides are introduced, new research comes out, old herbicides go out of production, all that stuff. So perhaps a nice thing about this show is, in fact, it kind of does force me to stay up to date on these things. So I'll try to continue on that way. Anyway, lots of great insight and comments and critiques. As always, you all couldn't be more proud of my comment section. Oh, and lastly, I wanted to give shouts to Patreon member Bill Price, who wrote 3 smiley face emojis and quote, "That's it. Just a happy at you, Jesse, and the crew for interesting and rational talk that comes across on your show every day instead of truly awful other things that fill my screen anymore. Know it's a chore for you, but it's appreciated on this end. So thank you. Go Sounders," end quote. Thanks, Bill. And shouts to you Seattle Sounders fans out there. You are generally, in fact, my West Coast team. So good luck on the rest of your season. Also, just really cool to hear. It was largely the point of the show to just be there, consistently for people and give them something fun and challenging or occasionally dumb to listen to. So thanks, Bill. And thanks to all of you who listen and support it. All right. Thanks as always for everyone. You all are awesome. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, calcium, tomatoes, fertigation, BRB. I spilled.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. Does this show bring you $2 worth of value every month? 5? I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. So maybe that makes that chipping in worth it. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Papa John Misty, who writes, quote, "Hi, Jesse. I'm having a mild tomato crisis. My soils are generally low in calcium, so I have been fertigating my tomatoes with a mix of calcium and fish emulsion. Things are going well when I was applying this on a weekly basis, but we have been getting absolutely drowned in rain the last 2 weeks, so I haven't been able to apply calcium. The tomatoes are now looking a lot more sad, some showing blossom end rot, and most of their leaves are flipping upside down, a sign I understand to possibly be signaling a calcium deficiency. My question is, how would you apply calcium if I continued to get this level of rain? I have a backpack sprayer and was thinking about just applying it directly at the base of the plants, but would love to hear your thoughts and recommendations. Looking forward to next year, do you think applying compost amended with calcium specifically to the tomato bed would help prevent a situation like this?" End quote. All right, so great questions here. Let's talk calcium and let's talk blossom end rot a little bit too, and also what I've done in the past that works pretty well for us and is fairly simple. First, calcium is important in soils for a number of reasons. It helps in soil aggregation. It helps microbes to colonize plant and mineral surfaces. Calcium is important for stabilizing soil organic matter, among other things. It's a nutrient that you're going to need and want to build healthy soil and healthy plants. In a situation where a soil test indicates low calcium in your soil, obviously, first and foremost, just listen to the agronomist's recommendations for how to approach that. But a soluble calcium like what you're referring to is always going to need some amount of refreshing. So you will also, or alternatively, want to look for more stable forms, such as gypsum in alkaline soils or calcitic limestone in acidic soils, to help stabilize the calcium in the soil for next year. Eggshells are a nice lo-fi option as well that a lot of people use. There's research that has demonstrated that the calcium carbonate found in eggshell powder can be effective, increasing your calcium availability. What we will do is toast eggshells lightly, crush them with a mortar and pestle, and add those to a compost slurry to be added to beds or just directly onto a compost pile. If the eggshells are left whole, the calcium will not be as accessible as quickly. Again, the smaller the particles, the more surface area for the microbes to access. I really like compost as my mediator because calcium will require healthy microbial populations to make the nutrients available to plants and other microbes. So adding small amounts of these amendments to compost or compost slurries and adding it to my soil is my preference. This is in fact how I like to address blossom end rot, though blossom end rot is not solely about calcium, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Basically, like I said, I make a slurry of water and compost and toasted powderized eggshells and let that sit overnight, and then add it the next day to a small furrow in the bed that I then recover with soil. Another potential lo-fi calcium option would be when you're in need of a quick fix, like it sounds like maybe you are here, Bill, that can be made at home is using the water-soluble calcium preparation from Korean Natural Farming called WCA. This is made by toasting or grilling small eggshell pieces. Do not burn them. That's not recommended. Then add those to a glass jar, glass container with enough brown rice vinegar to cover it. Usually it's suggested the container be 3/4 full. I think just make sure you get over top of the eggshells. Cover that glass jar with a breathable cloth, and a rubber band usually works fine. Leave that in a cool, dark place for a week or a week and a half. All the bubbling should have ceased by the time, that time has elapsed. Then strain it into a jar and store it in room temperature and in a dark place out of the sunlight. And it will store for quite a long time. I don't know exactly how long, I guess, but use it at a ratio of 1 to 1,000, so a little less than a teaspoon per gallon of water. That can be used as a foliar spray, but again, it takes about a week to make, and do not use much more than that 1 to 1,000 ratio or risk, causing some burn to your plants, because there's some vinegar, acetic acid in there, which is a natural herbicide. Now, back to the blossom end rot thing. That is kind of a calcium deficiency, but it is also more of a calcium access thing, meaning oftentimes blossom end rot is actually a sign of a lack of calcium in water or a poor water delivery rather than how much calcium is actually present in the soil itself. Though, of course, in low calcium soils, it can also be a sign of, well, just low calcium. So that may be too little water, but it can also be too much, like your example here, Papa John Misty. But start addressing blossom end rot by addressing the water management first, because that may solve the problem without the need for doing time-intensive tasks like foliar spraying. Or if there's not much you can do about the rain, which most of us can't, I would have happily saved some of our rain from the spring for this fall. Anyway, then a foliar spray may certainly help for the time being. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, the EPA thinks every day is opposite day. Be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. We know it's peak season, you're busy, but the messages you send now are what drive renewals later. That's why Farmhand is offering free, instant access to their farmer-built newsletter builder. No demos, no setup fees, just drop your logo, upload your list, and start sending farm-branded emails that boost sales, engage members, and save you hours each week. Get free access today at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. Okay, so the goings-on of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, are not on everyone's radar, but if you believe like I believe, and like the science demonstrates, that the environment and your health are inextricable, then, well, it's not the worst idea to just keep up with what these folks tasked to protect the environment, and by proxy your health, are up to. And given the EPA's actions over the last few months, let's all see if this sounds like a group who has any intention of protecting the environment and your health. So, to back up, this agency was created by Richard Nixon to, well, protect the environment. With massive quantities of unchecked industrial and personal waste, the environment in the late 60s was in a tangibly disastrous state. Quoting Time magazine article on the EPA's history, quote, "The evidence was right in front of citizens' faces. Pollution had gotten bad enough to be undeniable, and science had become advanced enough to make the reasons why clear. In 1963, smog had killed 400 New Yorkers, and the Lake Erie's oxygen content had become so depleted that the center of the lake sustained precious little life. An oil spill off the California coast in 1969 coated 400 square miles with slime and killed hundreds of birds. Scientists announced that auto exhaust was at high enough levels in some places that it could cause birth defects. The city of St. Louis smelled, as one resident put it, like an old-fashioned drugstore on fire," end quote. I've never seen or smelt a drugstore on fire, but somehow that's like the most evocative phrase. Anyway, so the EPA was formed in the summer of 1970, and its first administrator, William D. Ruckelshaus, said the EPA had, quote, "no obligation to promote agriculture or commerce, only the critical obligation to protect and enhance the environment," end quote. Awesome. That's great. We need such an agency. Again, you breathe the environment, you drink the environment, you eat the environment. It is not the worst idea to protect it. So the EPA served that mission, or at least it was supposed to. Until now. In March, current EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin announced a reorientation of the EPA's mission to, quote, "lower the cost of buying a car, heating a home, and running a business," end quote. So effectively, the opposite of the original intention of the agency. Quoting a New York Times article on the subject, quote, "Mr. Zeldin said the EPA would unwind more than 24 protections against air and water pollution. It would overturn limits on soot from smokestacks that have been linked to respiratory problems in humans and premature deaths, as well as restrictions on emissions of mercury, a neurotoxin. It would get rid of the good neighbor rule that requires states to address their own pollution when it's carried by winds into neighboring states, and it would eliminate enforcement efforts to prioritize the protection of poor and minority communities," end quote. So that's neat. In June, it was reported they wanted to reconsider the ban on the last type of asbestos that was used in the U.S. and was, in fact, banned last year for, causing cancer. In July, the EPA brought 3 herbicides containing the chemical dicamba back online after it had been banned for use for its tendency to drift into neighboring farms and damage non-GMO crops. It probably helps when a soybean lobbyist and previous advocate for this chemical is now the Deputy Assistant Administrator in the EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. Though to be fair, the whole leadership team is kind of a menagerie of special interest groups now, so that's, a thing. The EPA's research budget is being torched as well, because I guess who needs to know what's happening in the environment, right? The EPA, canceled $7 billion for the Solar for All project. They are getting rid of the 2009 endangerment finding, which found significant scientific evidence, which found that 6 greenhouse gases produced through the burning of fossil fuels, quote, endanger the public health and public welfare of current and future generations, end quote. So yeah, I guess that one had to go. Massive corporations have done superb work inspiring people to amplify the idea of regulations bad over the last few decades. And as a neon sign of that success, the EPA even has a place on their website website where you can submit deregulation requests, not like, hey, what environmental concerns in your area would you like us to investigate as your environmental protection agency, but rather, how can we help you pollute, my friend? And so on and so on. I literally don't have time to write out the exhaustive list of how our environment is being sold out here. Just know it ain't good and it ain't stopping, but it will affect you as a grower and a citizen. Now, there are still good people who work at the APA for now who care about its original mission, and I hope they know we're being critical of the leadership, not the researchers and scientists, nerds, etc., who are actually all passionate about environmental protection and, not in this case, corporate protection. I hope those folks can find a way to stay on and steer the ship in a way that protects our environment and our health, even in small ways. But the current direction of this agency by its leadership feels like it's not just a dereliction of duty, but a rigorous, aggressive, calculated betrayal of it. It will affect food, water, and air, hunters, fishermen, farmers. Everyone will lose, except the corporations. They've got a sweet setup here. Anyway, some of this stuff is still open for public comment if you want to, let them hear about it. They have made it masterfully difficult to navigate that, so I'll link that in the show notes. Otherwise, I think that's going to do it for the week. By Friday, don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn how to chip in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors, and if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat, not this one. This one's a Brighton and Hove Albion hat, which I actually wore to remind you to join our Premier League Fantasy League, which Mike will link in the show notes. But instead, one of these hats that we just got, the Corduroy or the Trucker Roy hat. Or pick up a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, to support our work over at notillgrowers.com. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of August, which we are halfway through. How's that feel? You get a shout out on the show. So shouts today to Jillian McMorris. Oh, that's like a lot of syllables in that one. That was very fun. Jillian McMorris. And Patrick Weaver, special shouts to Patrick Weaver too, because he guarantees every week that these stories actually get a resolution. So that's fun. Big ups to our current Sunlight sponsor. Anyway, speaking of resolutions, as you will remember, Zeke, our plumber, and Nerd, our scientist, Zeke's name, not mine, for his name is actually Lenny. They're standing there watching as a root of some sort comes out of the pipe, and it starts, bursts out of the pipe and is sort of scooting around the room, like pushing stuff off tables and seemingly in search of something. Suddenly, the scientist kind of recognizes what's happening here, I think, and rushes across the room, and Lenny sort of reaches under one of the coverings on the table and pulls out a small cage, and it's like not a cage, it's more like a tank, I guess, somewhere in between a cage and a tank. That's not a relevant detail. Anyway, and basically what Zeke can tell is that there are trees in there, or like plants, but they seem to have arms and legs and be moving around. Is this scientist like creating walking plants? The plant root that's scooting around the room finally gets to Lenny in his cage, stopping him from walking up the stairs, and then kind of just loses interest. Instead, it goes, kind of just leaves Lenny there and goes to a table where several vials of a liquid sit, and it sort of spills those onto itself, and then it retreats back into the pipes. Zeke thinks that he definitely thought these were going to be the root's babies or something, and then it was coming to get them, but that clearly isn't the case. Instead, they start to hear a large stomping sound overhead, and the room begins to shake under each of what sound like giant footsteps. Zeke turns to the scientist, who looks absolutely stunned, and says, just so it's clear, this is probably going to take me a little while to fix. Anyway, thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you on Monday. Bye.